We're back doing ATARI things this week, and now that we have a fully working STFM, I need a means of loading software. Yeah, it's got its original disk drive, but as we discovered last time, the only original disk game that I own, this one, it's gone bad. So need to think of an alternative solution, and the obvious one, the easiest one, I suppose, is a Gotek. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to try and fit a Gotek in this ATARI ST.
Boring.
No, wait, before you move on to the next video, I want to do it slightly differently because I like to keep a floppy drive in all my retro machines. So what I want to try and do is have that drive and this drive. I want to have both of them internal in this machine at the same time. So we need to figure out how we're going to do this. The ST does support 2 disk drives. That's usually drive A internal and drive B external, plugs in here. But how does the machine tell the difference between those two? Well, if we take a look at the schematics, we can see that the only difference really is in the drive select signal. There's drive select 0 or drive select 1. All other signals are shared between the 2 disk drives. Now, these are schematics for a 1040 STFM. I can't find any specific schematics for a 520 STFM, but I'm pretty sure they're the same. I certainly expect them to be the same in terms of the floppy. So we have the floppy drive controller here, WD1772, and it is handling most of the signals going out to the floppy drives, except for those drive select signals. They're actually handled back here by the sound chip of all things, that Yamaha chip, the YM2149, and the 2 drive select signals, they are on pins 19 and 20. Now it's quite hard to make out on this, but it is those 2 there. We can follow those through this schematic. The drive select signal for drive B, it just runs straight to the floppy drive stuff. Drive select signal for drive A, it takes a bit of a detour up here, going past the keyboard connector, but I think that's just so it can activate the floppy LED. It otherwise makes its way back down here and across to said floppy drives. Now this is labelled here as detail 1 in section A. If we move down to that, we can see a bit clearer. This is our signals here coming from that first page. Drive select 0, drive select 1, or A and B as I've been calling them. 0 or A, it runs along to the floppy drive connector on the motherboard. Drive select 1 or B, it only goes down to the external floppy port. But what I'm thinking we could possibly do here is utilize pin 12 on the internal floppy cable, because according to this, that is unused. So if we merely routed the wire from that drive select 1 down to pin 12, could we then pick that up on the Gotek? And if we had this set as disk drive 1, usually the drives on the ATARI are set as disk drive 0. You configure that on these jumpers. But if we set this to disk drive 1, well, that drive select signal, that is actually connected to pin 12 on this. So could it be that simple? If we connected 2 drives to the internal floppy header on the ST, I think we just need to run 1 patch wire and it'll work as drives A and drive B. I've been trying to trace this out, and it's actually slightly different from what's on the schematics. Not that it particularly matters, all we're really interested in is those 2 drive select signals, and sure enough, drive select 1 does run directly from the Yamaha chip across to this. It doesn't go anywhere else. Drive select 0 though, the path it takes is slightly different. The schematics show it going to a 74LS04 from pin 20 on this, from there, but that's not the case on this board. From there it runs to this 74LS02, sort of like this bit of the schematic, but the output of that, and it is connected to pins 8 and 9 on that, but the output on pin 10, the schematic shows that going direct to the floppy ribbon, but that's not the case. Rather, the output of that goes to this 7406 coming into pin 13. The output of that is pin 12, and that is going back to the keyboard, but also seemingly making its way to these pads here. And that's really as far as I've been able to trace it. I haven't been able to figure out yet how it makes its way to this. But look, as I say, it's not particularly important. What is important is that the two drive select signals do appear to be separate. And on this, on pin 12, I just flip this over, that is pin 12, and that does indeed seem to be floating. It doesn't seem to be connected to anything. We can't really tell on the top side here, just because the ribbon's in the way. This doesn't disconnect, that is soldered onto the board. I am though going to remove it, and we're just going to fit some pins on here. That's because I need to change this. It's obviously only got the one connector on it, we need two. But while we're doing a bit of soldering, I'm also going to remove this because we need two different power supplies, one for the floppy drive, the other for the Gotek. So I'll just desolder those wires and then twist them together with these ones from this floppy power lead. Cut this off an old AT power supply. We'll just twist it together with that, stick it down through those holes, and that should give us the two supplies that we need. Most of these on this side are proving incredibly difficult to get out. So I have turned the temperature this way up. That side of the floppy connector is all grounds, more or less. And those are massive ground planes. So maybe we have to go for the 2-iron approach. I'll use the soldering iron and the desoldering station. Try and just keep some heat in it with the iron, while the soldering station is dealing with the solder itself. Yep, that seems to have got it that time, although it does inevitably wind up scratching the board a bit. I think we're going to have to do that with more or less all of them. I think that's it now. And yeah, that's it out. What about that pin 12? Is there anything we can see on this side going to it? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Nope, it is completely isolated there as well. So I think that's what we'll do. We'll just run a patch wire from the underside of this across to there. And I figured out how drive select 0 arrives at pin 10. There's a trace from there on the underside, comes to that 0 ohm resistor. Through that and back across to pin 12 with that 06. The trace coming off that branches, going both to there and down to the keyboard. So yeah, it is slightly different from what's on those schematics, although our board here is a Rev F2. Those schematics are for a Rev A 1040. So presumably ATARI just changed a few things along the way. But as I said, not overly critical for us today. So we'll just put these 2 rows of pin headers in here. And just to keep everything orientated correctly there, I'm just going to put a couple of jumpers on it. And we'll just do opposite corners. And it looks to be sitting pretty straight, although I will just reflow it quickly just while pushing on the pins on the other side. That should be it. Then we just need to run a wire from the drive select signal on the external floppy port, which is that one there, that pin, down to pin 12 on the floppy connector itself, which is that one. Prefer that to be flush to the board. That looks a bit better. So just let me tidy things up a bit, and then we'll test this theory to see if it works. Wasn't really happy with how those power leads were sitting, so redid it there just very quickly. Put a bit of heat shrink around the bottom of them just to make sure that nothing there can ever short out. And made this ribbon cable so we can connect up the two drives, just a straight through floppy cable. You can't use a PC floppy cable because it would obviously have the twist in it. And while this is actually from an old PC floppy cable, I just took the ends off, cut it up and re-crimped it all. Hopefully I made it long enough. But that will go on there now. And we'll hook up the real floppy drive. And I'll just leave that balancing back there. And then we'll hook up the Gotek, which is set as drive 1. Let's see if it works. Well, ATARI still seems to work. That's always a good thing. Hold on a second. I just noticed something. I have this plugged in wrong. When connecting a Gotek to your ATARI ST, you need to do that. Because pin 1 on the Gotek is beside the power connector. So you need to twist the entire cable around. That should be it now though. And yeah, that's right. It boots up the gem straight away. So, just using the keyboard here to navigate with the mouse. Let's see if we can open drive A. There it is, blank disk. But can we now also open drive B? And there it is. It's working. That's the contents of that disk image that's on that USB stick. Fantastic. How about we try and copy the contents of that onto that real disk? So just let me close these two windows. We'll select B. Now if we go to File and Format, but we're going to change to Copy. Probably a quicker way of doing this. I'm just not overly familiar with gem. And if we select from B to A, and let's click OK. So there it goes. It is reading the contents of the disk image. And it's now writing it to the real disk. Now when it's accessing drive A like that, it lights up the floppy LED here. When it was accessing this, it doesn't light that LED. That's because the LED is wired into the drive 0 select line, so that can only be lit when drive 0 or drive A is selected. That seems to have copied successfully. So we'll just close that and let's see if our files are now in here. Yeah, there it is. Fantastic. That has worked perfectly. Can we load the RAM test? Yeah, it is perfect. And I can hear it running from the floppy. But we don't need to run this because we know there are no RAM errors on the ST. Now with this, I can't unfortunately fit the cover that usually sits here at the back of the floppy drive. But equally, we can't really leave it like that either. So we need to come up with something, and this is my idea. You see these used all the time on the Amiga or even on the Atari ST, where you're replacing the disk drive with a Gotek. This has the LCD screen on it and the rotary encoder. This particular one was designed by Carrie, and she very kindly gave me permission to modify it for use on my ST, because on the back of it I've added space for a USB port and a switch. The idea is that we will mount this somewhere on the top of the ST's case, and then this USB port that will mount in there on this bracket, which equally also holds the OLED in place. And then the switch, that'll let us change between the Gotek being drive B or drive A, swapping it with the floppy drive. Now it is going to be a bit of a wiring mess, and I need to try and get all those wires up through the vents in this They are quite tight on the ST, certainly tighter than they are on the Amiga, and they need to come up through that, through this. I created this base, which will sit below that, just held in place by friction, I hope, with these two rails on it. I designed them with these two little tabs, which should line up with the slots and the holes in the case, so that when we do mount this, say something like that, and just push, it snaps into place, and that should be enough to hold it. Getting it back out, just a matter of pushing from right to left. So I think I'm just going to run a load of DuPont wires up through this. I think I need to run 12 in total. I've removed the Gotek from its case, and off this you can see I've also removed the USB port, the two buttons and the LED. We're going to be installing this sort of there in the ATARI using this bracket. This bit along the back with those two holes in it, that should line up with those two holes in the shielding, and the existing screws are quite long, so they should just go down through that. Yeah, I think that will work nicely. So as I said, an awful lot of wires to run. I was going to use these. In fact, I may still have to use some of these or parts of these, but I also found this flat ribbon, and I just think this would be a lot easier to get up through the slots on the top bit of the case. So I think that's what we'll do. We'll put that up through the slots, and then I can make off the wires on this onto the various points here that we need. This is a 16-way ribbon. I thought I needed 12. I actually need 14. The other two, I'll just make an extra couple of grounds. I'm sure you've seen these things wired up a million times before, so I'm not going to cover it in any great detail. But the one thing that we do need to do, obviously, is pick up the drive select signals so that we can interchange them. And I'm going to do that just down here on the Yamaha chip. So as I said earlier, it is pins 19 and 20. What I'm going to do is just take this out of its socket, and if we bend those two legs out just slightly, then I can make off wires to that point. If I then take this other 40 pin socket, stick that into the original one, we'll make off two wires to positions 19 and 20. And then our chip with its two lifted legs will go in there with the wires from there going up to the switch, along with the other two wires that are in that socket. That should be all we need to be able to reverse the polarity of those 2 points, swapping drive A and drive B between the floppy drive and the Gotek. That's everything hooked up, so let's see what it does. OLED comes up, flash floppy, version 3.43. Maybe we should insert the USB stick. And sure enough, it has now picked up the discs. Just going to put it onto that one, which is the RAM test. And I dumped this into Gem, but the floppy light is stuck on. What's that all about? We've got our blank disk here. Well, let's first of all see if we can access the disk image, because I'm not actually sure with the switch on the back of this if it's currently set to this being drive B or drive A. Let's just try it as drive B. Nope. And notice that that light has now went out. That would make me think that the position that switch is in has this as drive A, actually. Let's just see. And no, it doesn't like that. Now, it was trying to access the floppy drive there. So let's put this in. Let's just try that again. Yeah. Drive A is currently set to the real floppy drive. But why can I not access this as drive B? Maybe that's it now. Maybe I went into the menu on this. This is the first time I've actually used a Gotek with a rotary encoder. I changed it to the disk image I wanted there and pushed the button. Maybe you don't need to do that. So we're back to disk image 4, which is the RAM test. Let's just try it now. Yeah, it's reading, and there it is. Fantastic. So I'll take the floppy disk out. Just confirm that there is no disk there. I can't read anything on drive A. Yeah, that's right. Now if we flick this switch, if we try reading drive A again, it will now hopefully read from the Gotek. And it does. Awesome. That is fantastic. But one thing I didn't notice there, I didn't notice if it turned on that LED. I don't think it did. No, it doesn't. If I put the floppy disk in and try to access drive B, yeah, that brings on the LED. I suppose that makes sense, doesn't it? As while we have swapped it over at those pins on the Yamaha chip, the rest of the circuitry on the board, it remains the same. So with the switch in the position where the floppy drive is drive B, as far as the rest of the board is concerned, it's still that drive select 0 signal. That's why it's bringing on the LED. A very minor niggle though. Otherwise, this is perfect. We've got the 2 drives in the machine, and we can select using this switch which one is drive A. Gotek is currently drive A. That allows me to load disk images so that if I hit reset, I can have a game of Microprose Golf. And I don't care what anyone says, no golf game has ever had better, more appropriate theme music. Although granted that 20 seconds or whatever it is, that's the only music in this entire game. Well, there we are. We now have 2 disk drives in our ATARI ST. It's original floppy and now Gotek access through this thing with a little switch to pick which one of these is drive A, the other being drive B. And honestly, I could not be happier with how this turned out. Thanks again to Carrie for allowing me to use her little enclosure here, allowing me to modify it to suit our needs today. And if anyone watching wants to try and do something similar themselves, well, I've linked down to Thingiverse where you'll find all the STL files for the various bits and pieces that I have printed here. I think if I was going to do it again myself, the only thing I might do slightly differently is use a longer ribbon cable, just so I could have this maybe over here. I think it might look a bit better just on the side of the case. But a very minor complaint, because it's all working perfectly. I've got the 2 disk drives in there, and yeah, what more do we need? And after loading it there, I decided to have a game of Microprose Golf, then saved my progress to that real disk that we've been using in Gem. Now the game does only read or write to disks in drive A. We loaded the game off the Gotek, no problem, just flick the switch on the back, put the disk into the drive, and then I was able to save it to there. Flick the switch back and I can continue playing the game. So yeah, I think this has worked out great. Now obviously it does render the external floppy port here redundant. I'm not sure what would happen if you tried to plug in another floppy drive in here. I dare say you would just get confliction between it and either Gotek or the internal floppy drive, you know, depending on which way the switch was set. But if anyone is thinking of doing this mod, I would just then assume that this external floppy port, that's just out of use. But now that we've got floppy drives covered, the next thing we need to think about is a hard drive. We are going to be sticking with drive emulation because I've got one of these to build. An ASCII to STM. Not in this video though, we'll maybe do this next time. As for this video, let me know what you think about this mod. Is it something you consider doing to your ST? As I say, if you do want to do it, all the files you need for it are linked below. If you did enjoy the video, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Why not hit subscribe if you haven't done so already? Still plenty more yet to come here on CRG, and I'll see you next time.